The smell of my wife's peach cobbler was still in the kitchen when my son-in-law walked through my front door that Thanksgiving, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so warm could share a room with something so cold. My daughter, Lena, had married Garrett 2 years before. I had nothing against him at first. He was pleasant enough, the kind of man who knew how to look you in the eye when he shook your hand and remembered your coffee order, which I've learned over 67 years of living means very little about a person's character. My wife, Patricia, God rest her soul, had her doubts from the beginning. She never said it plainly. That wasn't her way. But I caught her watching him sometimes at the dinner table, that quiet, measuring look she used to give. She passed 14 months before that Thanksgiving. Pancreatic cancer, 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I still haven't fully figured out how to live in a house that used to hold her. I sold my landscaping company in August. 41 years I'd built that business from a used truck and a borrowed mower. When we finally closed, the number on the wire transfer was $4.2 million. I sat in my accountant's office in Louisville for a long time after the papers were signed, not celebrating, just sitting. Patricia and I had planned that money together. Foundation donations, the grandchildren's education, a property in the Smoky Mountains we'd always talked about. I was going to do those things anyway. I just wasn't going to do them with her. My son, Philip, knew about the sale. He lives in Knoxville with his family, and we talk every Sunday. Lena knew too, though I hadn't given her or Garrett specific numbers. That was intentional. Patricia had warned me once, not about Garrett specifically, just in general. Don't let money change how people see you before you see how money changes them. I thought about that a lot in the months after the sale. Thanksgiving that year was at my house. It had always been at our house, Patricia's and mine, and I didn't want to give that up. My neighbor Josephine helped me set up the table. She'd been a quiet kind of support since Patricia passed. Not intrusive, just present. My brother Alton came up from Bowling Green with his wife. Philip drove in with his kids. Lena and Garrett arrived last, which I noted because Lena was usually the first one through the door for family gatherings. She said they'd had trouble with traffic on 64. Garrett said nothing. He hugged me briefly and complimented the house and moved toward the living room like a man who had somewhere specific to be. Dinner was fine, the kind of fine that feels like effort. Garrett talked more than usual about a business idea he'd been developing, some kind of commercial real estate venture he was pursuing with a partner in Nashville. He brought it up casually, the way people do when something isn't casual at all. Lena watched me when he talked. Not Garrett. Me. I noticed that. After dinner, Philip took the kids outside. Alton and his wife were helping Josephine clear the table. Lena went to the kitchen. Garrett and I were left in the living room, and he leaned forward in the armchair across from me with his elbows on his knees, the way men do when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. He talked about the real estate project for a while. He talked about timing and opportunity, and how the commercial market in the Nashville corridor was positioned for the next 5 years. He was good at it. Smooth. He had a folder, which he produced from somewhere. I still don't know where he'd had it, with some printed pages, projections, and property photos, and what looked like a business summary. He set it on the coffee table between us, like it was incidental, like he just happened to have it. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today," he said. "I just wanted you to have the information." I looked at the folder. I looked at him. I said I appreciated him sharing it and that I'd take a look. He nodded and smiled and sat back, and the conversation moved on. But I noticed something when he stood up to get a drink. He glanced at the folder on the coffee table, the way a man glances at something he's been told to leave behind, but hasn't actually left behind. A checking glance, making sure it was still there. I didn't sleep well that night. I called my attorney the next morning, not because of anything specific I could point to, I want to be honest about that. I called because of a feeling. 41 years of running a business teaches you to take your feelings seriously, even when you can't justify them in a sentence. My attorney, a man I worked with for 20 years, named Howard, told me to document everything and be cautious about signing anything without his review. He also suggested I speak with my financial advisor about any unusual activity in accounts Lena might have access to. Lena had a limited power of attorney. From when Patricia was sick, it was specific and narrow, only for medical decisions, but it had never been formally revoked. Howard said we should address that. Over the following 3 weeks, things seemed normal. Garrett texted me once about the folder, asking if I'd had a chance to review it. I told him I had some questions and would follow up. He said no rush. Lena called twice, which was typical. Nothing felt alarming on the surface, and I started to wonder if I was manufacturing suspicion out of loneliness or grief or some old man's paranoia. Then my financial advisor called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He told me that someone had contacted my brokerage the previous week requesting information about transferring assets and the process for updating beneficiary designations. The representative had asked for verification and the request had stalled, but he wanted me to know. The inquiry had come from a number that, when I wrote it down and looked at it for a while, I recognized. It was a number Garrett had texted me from once, different from his usual one. I had it saved without a name because I hadn't known at the time whose it was. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you what that moment is like, because I don't think people who haven't been through it understand it. It's not like anger in movies. It's not hot and immediate. It's more like something cold and slow moving through your chest. It's the particular grief of being betrayed by someone connected to someone you love. Because my first thought wasn't about the money. My first thought was about Lena, about whether she knew, about whether she was part of it. And I didn't want to know the answer to that because either answer was going to hurt. I called Howard that afternoon. Then I called the private investigator named Ronald, who a friend from my Rotary chapter had used during a business dispute a few years back. I told both of them what I knew. Howard told me not to contact Garrett or Lena about any of this. Ronald told me to keep my behavior completely normal, no changes in how I communicated with either of them, no unusual distance, nothing that might signal I knew anything. That was the hardest part, pretending. Lena and Garrett came for dinner 3 weeks before Christmas. I made pot roast. Garrett was his usual self, engaged, conversational, complimentary about the food. He asked again about the investment folder, gently, almost offhandedly. I told him I'd been distracted with some estate matters and hadn't gotten to it. He nodded sympathetically, said there was no pressure, said he just wanted to make sure I had the information before the opportunity window closed early next year. I said I understood. Lena was quieter than usual. She helped me in the kitchen after dinner, while Garrett watched football in the living room. She asked how I was doing. Really doing, she said, and she looked at me with her mother's eyes, which she has exactly, and I almost said something. I almost asked her directly, but I didn't because Ronald had told me not to, and because some part of me still believed that maybe she was separate from it, that maybe she was my daughter first and his wife second in the ways that mattered most. Ronald came back to me 10 days before Christmas. He had documentation of Garrett meeting twice with an attorney in Franklin. Not his usual attorney, a different one, a name I didn't recognize, specializing in estate law. He had records of Garrett researching revocable living trusts and the process for contesting wills in Tennessee. He had, most significantly, documentation suggesting Garrett had made contact with a notary and asked questions about the process for witnessing signatures for elderly individuals who might have memory concerns. I am 67 years old. I have no memory concerns. I run 4 miles 3 times a week. I do the crossword every morning. But I understood what that language meant and what it was building toward. Howard and I met the following day. We put several things in place. We formally revoked the limited power of attorney. We updated my estate documents with 2 witnesses and video notarization. Howard drafted a letter from my estate to all relevant financial institutions, flagging that any requests for account information or beneficiary changes required his direct verification. We also documented the timeline of everything I had observed and what Ronald had uncovered. Then Howard said something I hadn't expected. He said that what Garrett had done so far was concerning and worth watching, but it hadn't yet crossed into criminal territory. The brokerage inquiry could be explained away. The attorney meetings were legal. The notary conversation was legal. We needed to wait. I didn't like waiting, but I understood. My Christmas party has been a tradition for 22 years. Patricia started it the second Saturday of December. Neighbors and friends and family, the house full of people she loved. I kept it after she passed because I knew she would have wanted me to. That year, the party was different in one specific way. Howard suggested I use it, not as a trap exactly. He was careful about his language. He said that if Garrett believed the moment was right, he might act. And if he acted with witnesses present and documentation ready, we would have what we needed. I didn't put anything out. I didn't create a situation. I hosted my party exactly as I always had. Josephine's famous cheese dip, Alton's bourbon cake, the same playlist Patricia used to love. But Howard was there, which wasn't unusual because he'd come to the Christmas party for 15 years. And Ronald was there, which was new, introduced to everyone simply as a friend of Alton's from Bowling Green. And I placed a specific folder on my desk in my home office, documents that looked like financial summaries but were actually prepared by Howard to be legally meaningless. And I left my office door unlocked, which I don't normally do. The party filled in the way it always does. 24 people, the kind of noise a house is meant to hold. Garrett arrived with Lena looking comfortable at ease. He worked the room. He talked to Alton for a long time, which I watched from across the room. He had a drink and then another. 40 minutes into the party, I was in the kitchen with Josephine when I saw Garrett excuse himself from a conversation near the fireplace. I watched him move down the hall. He stopped outside my office. He tried the handle. The door opened. He went inside. I gave it 4 minutes. Howard was near the hallway. Ronald had positioned himself where he could see the office door. When Garrett came out, he was carrying nothing visible, but Ronald had a small camera that had been running in the office, fully legal in Tennessee with proper disclosure on the property, which Howard had confirmed, and it showed Garrett at my desk, photographing the documents in the folder with his phone. I was back in the kitchen when he rejoined the party. He found me 20 minutes later, and we talked about football for a while. He seemed relaxed. Whatever he had done, he felt good about it. At 9 o'clock, I asked for everyone's attention. I do this every year. Patricia used to make a small speech, and I've continued the tradition. I thanked everyone for coming. I talked about the year and what it had meant. I talked about the foundation donation I was planning in Patricia's name to the Children's Hospital where she had volunteered for 11 years. I watched Garrett's face when I announced the donation amount. It wasn't the reaction of someone hearing news. It was the reaction of someone doing arithmetic. Howard made his move 2 days after Christmas. He presented the documentation to Garrett directly, with a letter that outlined specifically what we knew: the brokerage contact, the attorney meetings, the notary inquiry, and the recording from the office. The letter explained that the documents Garrett had photographed were prepared materials with no legal value, and that using them for any purpose, including presenting them to a financial institution, would constitute fraud. The letter also made clear that no criminal charges were being filed at that time. Howard had been deliberate about that. He told me it was more effective as a deterrent than a weapon, at least to begin with, and that if Garrett was rational, he would understand his position. Garrett was rational. I'll give him that. He came to me alone the following week. It was a Wednesday, midday. He sat across from me in the same armchair he'd sat in at Thanksgiving, but he looked different in it, smaller somehow. He told me that he'd made serious mistakes, that he was ashamed, that the financial pressure from the Nashville deal had pushed him somewhere he never should have gone. He didn't ask me not to tell Lena, but I could see that fear in him. I told him that I was going to tell Lena, not to punish him, but because she was my daughter and she deserved to know who she was married to and make her own decisions from a place of truth. I told him that I had not filed criminal charges and did not intend to, provided he had no further contact with my finances, my estate, or my legal documents in any form. I told him Howard would be monitoring that. He nodded and left. Telling Lena was the hardest conversation of my life, and I've had some hard ones. She sat at my kitchen table and I put coffee in front of her and I laid it out. Everything from Thanksgiving to Christmas. She didn't cry right away. She went very still, which is what Patricia used to do when something hit her deeply. Then she asked me one question. Did I know? She meant, had I wondered if she was involved? I told her the truth. I told her I had wondered, and that it had been the most frightening part, and that I was grateful every day I'd found out she wasn't. She cried then, for a long time. I don't know what will happen with her marriage. That's hers to decide. What I know is that she has been at my house for dinner every Sunday since that conversation, and that the last time she came she brought her mother's recipe for peach cobbler and made it from scratch in Patricia's kitchen while I sat at the table and watched. She got the cinnamon ratio exactly right. It smelled exactly the same. I sat there and I thought about what Patricia would say if she could see us. Her daughter in her kitchen, her husband still standing, the house still full. I think she would say that was enough. That whatever we'd been through, that was enough. Patricia used to tell me that the hardest thing about loving people is that you can't protect them from their own choices. You can only protect yourself long enough to still be there when they come back to you. I'm still here. And Lena came back. That's the whole of it, really. The money is safe. The foundation donation went through in February, $140,000 to Cosair Children's Hospital in Louisville, which is what Patricia and I had planned. My office door has a new lock, and every Sunday, my daughter sits at my kitchen table, and we drink coffee, and we talk about her mother. And the house holds us both the way it was always meant to.